It's hard to talk about endpoints too much without also talking about models, so let's jump into the model layer of the backend now. The backend's model layer is much like the model layer of any web application in that it's interested in taking data and storing it in a relational database and then getting it back out again. In our case, we think in terms of JSON models, so what we're really interested in is taking a JSON model from the controller layer and converting that into a structure that we can store in a relational database and query it efficiently and all of these sort of things. And we also want to do the reverse. We want to be able to say, get a record out of the database and all of its associated bits and turn it back into a JSON model and then send that to the user. So these are the two things that the model layer does with the backend. It takes JSON models and stores them in the database, and it takes them out of the database and turns them back into JSON models. Since we've been looking at accessions so far, let's jump and have a look at the model for accessions. I'll just jump back to the backend app model accession file. And this is it. So the interesting thing about our models is that there's usually not very much to them. The funny thing about the backend is that all the code is somewhere else. You'll see we have a lot of these include directives, and each of these include directives is a mix-in that adds some piece of behavior to this model. The reason for this is because within ArchivesSpace we have a lot of different record types, but most record types share behavior with other record types. So for example, an accession can have a date, for example, and we have this on line 8 here, we have this include dates, which says add support for dates to this record. But of course accession isn't the only record that can have dates, because various other ones can as well. So rather than having all of our models duplicate the code for dealing with dates, we pull them out into mix-ins, and a model ends up really just being a collection of behaviors that are mixed into it. So we said that the model layer of the backend is really interested in taking JSON model records and storing them in the database, and then performing the reverse translation of taking them out of the database and back into JSON model records. But as we scroll down this model, obviously there's nothing here that really does any of that. And so the place we need to look to find that behavior is actually this top AS model mix-in. So the AS model mix-in is added to all of the models in the backend, and it provides the very primitive methods for saving something to the database and getting it out again, and all of the different models will use this. So I'm going to jump to that now, and it's not in this directory, I'm sorry. AS model. And here it is. So the AS model mix-in is divided into another couple of submodules. And in this case, the one we're interested in is the AS model CRUD module. I'm going to jump to that. So what we're interested in here is the create from JSON method, which is here. And you can see create from JSON takes this parameter called JSON, which is actually a JSON model instance, and it applies nested records, does a self.create, which is going to add it to the database. So create from JSON is responsible for kicking that whole thing off of taking a JSON model object and converting it into a database record. Similarly, there is a update from JSON method, which is an instance level method. So when you have a database record already, you can call update from JSON on it and provide it a JSON model, and it will take the values from that JSON model and update its own values. And for the reverse transformation, we have this one called SQL to JSON model. So SQL to JSON model takes a database record and turns it into a JSON model. So it does the reverse transformation, pulling everything out of the database and packing it into a JSON model.